Evening, everybody. Jim and
Curtis Carlson here. Thanks for joining us. Tonight I think we're going to take a little dive on plumbing and try to, expose some of the things that might be otherwise intimidating to some of the owners out there sometimes. So,
these guys are a couple of our leaders on our service team, and we get tons of questions every day. Anything from water leaks to just how does plumbing go together. So they're just here to show you some tips and tricks and not to be so scared of what you're seeing behind the panels in your RV.
Absolutely.
So just as an overview in general, it's really not that scary. It's not an intimidating thing. There are a lot of connections. Water is routed to a number of places in the RV. There's valves involved. There's traps involved. To the unexperienced person, this may sound daunting. It is certainly not. It's very much plumbed very similar to a house with PEX plumbing throughout in our coaches. That is a very, very user-friendly product. The lines are blue and red for hot and cold, very easily identifiable. We have access panels, we have shutoff valves. I'll get into all these later, but what I'm trying to illustrate is that there's a lot of accessibility, a lot of availability of parts aftermarket if you ever need anything. It's not hard for the average person to work on these themselves, even with no experience. Just a couple simple tools and you're on your way, and you can get yourself back up and running if you do have a problem. But first of all, I'd like to start about at the front near the Nautilus panel and try to demystify some of the situation of what this panel is. It's a water control center. It's where your city water comes in. It's where you control your pump. There's a lot of things going on there, but it's a very user-friendly interface. There's instructions right on it, but behind the scenes, it looks like a Medusa. And it's really not that intimidating if you understand what it's doing. So I would bring you up to the front of the coach. When you open up your basement door on the off door side, you're greeted with this, the water control center. Many of you are familiar with it, as it's not just for us. Other brands use this type of panel as well. Here we have obviously fresh water coming in from the city hookup. This is your pressurized source when you're at a campground or at a house. That will feed the whole system. You will not be using your pump when utilizing this system here. This other one we sometimes get asked for people who haven't dealt with this yet is the black tank flush system. We'll touch on that a little bit later, but when you're hooking up for your fresh water, this is what you want to be using. This is an outside shower, very, very simple. There's a quick connect here. We provide a coiled spray hose that we can operate, and you could also hook it up to different kinds of quick connect hoses, aftermarket available for some people use sprinklers and stuff, but that's beside the point. Mostly you got 4 valves here. What this is, depending on the orientation of these valves, will direct flow of water in different ways, shapes, and forms. There's a diagram right above it that tells you exactly what those valve positions are located at for specific purposes. There's dry camping, power fill tank, city water, winterize, and sanitize. Those are for just different operations that we deal with on throughout a year, depending on where you're at. So you would select the valve orientation for what you're trying to do. City water is probably the most commonly used because most people are camping at campsites that have city water hookups. If we get into boondocking, then you would change it more over to a dry camping mode, which again, is just that simple. And then you'd be drawing from your freshwater tank with the provided pump, which has a switch here in this case to turn it on. There's also a switch on the inside of the coach as well. And it doesn't matter which one is in which position, you will be able to see it turned on because there will be a red indicator light here or inside the coach when that pump is active.
Hey, Jim, if you ever needed to bypass the water heater, whether it's winterizing or for any other reason, is there a single dial that does that?
I had to say something about go to the website below.
Yeah, Tom always is.
And I didn't.
So in winterized mode, we can certainly up here in winterized mode, we bypass the water heater, but we're using the pump at that point in time. And Curtis, I believe if I'm wrong, in the sanitized mode, does it also?
It also
bypasses
the water heater.
So in sanitized mode, you would be able to bypass your water heater. And that would be it.
The value in bypassing the water heater is so you don't pick up the flavor, the taste, that metal can pick up that the hint of that stuff. So it can taste pretty nasty. So the goal is to drain your water heater by releasing pressure and pulling your anode rod, and that'll dump the tank completely so it's empty. And then you winterize the rest of the coach and then you go through and do the drainage system in a little bit different manner. But kind of like Jim touched on, central location for plumbing, that is the goal for us. We also run our gate valves here. In most cases, there are some floor plans. Keep in mind, these have a cable behind them that are running great lengths in this coach. So depending on the layout of the tanks and the coach, sometimes we will have to put one on a chassis rail. In this case, you can see one a little further down right here for another tank. So just, it's all about layout and how these things work. So the goal is to get everything centralized. And one other thing that we do here in Alliance, pretty unique, is we also, you won't see it on this one, but we also give you a service hatch right here. So when this is complete, a little further up line, you'll have a service hatch where you can open up and gain access to behind here to service. Maybe you had a leak because we, put a drip pan in there a little further down the line. You see some water. Okay, do I have a leak, or do I have a simple gasket that I need to add to my hose for my water connection, whether that be black tank flush or city water? So that's the goal there, is simplifying the plumbing system for you.
So can we take a look at behind the utility panel? I think we have a sample one here on the floor, just to give the folks an idea of the complexity going on back here. And while it's complex, it is really simple if there ever was an issue or something that needed to be addressed.
All of these connections are readily accessible from behind the panel, from standing outside the unit, accessing it through that basement door that I previously mentioned. These are all off-the-shelf type components: elbows, Oetiker crimp rings, just sections of PEX pipe. Again, any leak in these scenarios, if that was to happen, would be replaceable with off-the-shelf items available at Home Depot, Lowe's, Ace Hardware, Menards, stuff like that. The only situations that I have anything but PEX are these risers. And people ask, well, why do you use these in these particular situations? These two attach to the 12-volt pump. And that 12-volt pump, obviously, as it runs, creates vibration. And this allows it to vibrate and keep it isolated from the rest of the PEX system for noise. In addition to that, vibration over time creates stress cracks, but potentially in fittings.
And the protection of the pump itself. The inlet is plastic as well, and you can impact the inlet if you don't have the proper absorption for vibration.
It's a stress relief type situation. And the pump, again, you can't see it here, but is mounted right in this general area on the floor. Maybe Bill could shoot it. And it's just a small pump like this. Is an on-demand situation. When it pumps up to 55 PSI, it turns off until you open up a valve, and then it creates a pressure differential, and you was able to flow the water out, and then it kicks on and it builds back up until you turn it off. Now, some people have experienced situations where that pump won't turn off. That is one of the questions that we get, and there's a number of reasons that could happen. There is an adjustment on the pump. It's not typically needed to be addressed, but there is a bypass on the pump that is adjustable. If you've gone through and verified that you don't have any leaks in your coach, that you're not running any faucets, the toilet valve's not leaking, you don't see any drips coming outside, it'd be worth looking at your bypass valve on your pump. It's just adjustable via an Allen key, just a little hex.
Yep. And a lot of people think that they've got a bad pump, but sometimes it is a maintenance thing. It like I said, it's very rare to have to do, but it does happen. So you pump fail, but it's very, very few and far between. We use a very solid pump, and most of them are just a solid pump all around. And like Jim said, I would touch on pressure real quick. A lot of people ask, what pressure should you get for your regulator? What pressure should you allow into the coach? I always say between 50 and 60 pounds. Anything above that, you could potentially damage the system. I mean, a normal household runs in that range as well. So you're probably going to see it a little bit north of 55, but somewhere in that ballpark. So if you have that pressure at a park, and I have a pressure regulator on my coach, I'm sure Jim probably does too, that regulates the pressure at 55 pounds for me. So if I have a wild source of water that's going to pump too much pressure in, I minimize it at that pressure regulator. So that's something common to get, and a very, very affordable and cheap. You get on Amazon for a few bucks, and that can save you from a lot of heartache and pain potentially with hooking up to a kind of a wild water source, if you will.
Absolutely, good point.
So let's talk a little bit about the black tank flush. That's another thing that we hear. How do we do it? What do I need to look for? Are there pitfalls? Sure. Yes, there can be some pitfalls to it. So Jim knows firsthand.
I sure do. So in flushing your black tank system, you hook a city water hookup, a pressurized water source to your garden hose fitting. And when there's no valves or anything, once you hook it up and you turn it on, it is flowing through PEX piping. It's white PEX piping. So that'll be the only PEX piping in the coach that's not blue or red. And that will go to each black tank. If you have two, if you only have one, it'll only go to the one. And inside the tank is a spray nozzle that allows pressurized water to spray around the tank and dislodge solid material in there. I'm not trying to get gross about it, but we're just trying to keep the black tank clean because it is a source of odor. It can have buildup and it can lead to incorrect readings of the sensors.
So you want to leave your black tank closed, the valve closed on it while you're filling it, but make sure that you don't overflow.
Yes.
Well, let's touch on that real quick. If you call and ask us, you call and ask the tank manufacturer, they're going to tell you never, ever, ever close your valve when you're filling your black tank flush or spraying in your black tank. Because, and I've seen it happen, people walk away, people forget, tanks blow up. It'll force black water up a vent pipe out of a ceiling. I've seen it happen. It can happen.
Yeah.
So I'm going to segue into something else here. A lot of times you get people talking about probes and probe readings. You can 100% control your probe readings if you utilize your black tank system properly. For example, you buy a coach for the first time, reads empty, you use your tanks, they fill up. Great. You go drain it and it still reads 3/4. Reads 3/4 the next 3 times you use it. You don't know what's going on. You go, if you hook up properly, if you drain properly, black, I go black, I go gray. Then I run my black tank flush. I will run that thing for an hour, 2 hours. When I'm putting up my camper, I'll leave it wide open, just let it run. And if my probes aren't reading properly, I will then come back and I will close my low point. I put it on a timer, 3 to 4 minutes. Let that backfill, get up over the probes, dump it out again. I do that sometimes 2 to 3 times during that process. But again, I cannot stress enough. Do not forget that thing's closed because it will cause all kinds of big problems for yourself. So nobody's going to tell you this. We're going to tell you in the manual not to do it. The tank manufacturer is going to tell you not to do it, but you can get those probes clean if you maintain them properly with proper drainage. And I've learned this from other campers actually. You know, some of our own customers. I could even name drop them, but probably leave them out of there. I don't want them to be embarrassed. But you can actually utilize the black tank flush to keep your probes clean. A lot of people talk about this as a common thing in the industry, but backfilling, as long as you time it and do it properly, you can utilize that to keep your probes clean and reading properly all the time. I do it on a weekend basis.
Absolutely. I'm the one that's guilty of blowing up my own black tank, or actually the black tank at the rally.
Seen it happen.
So it was me. I'm an experienced RVer. I went away. I forgot about it. It's easy to do. It's easy to get distracted. So again, I'm just reinforcing what Curtis says. Yes, it can be done, but just do it. Be careful. Pay attention. You don't want to have that problem. It's not pleasant.
So sometimes these don't work. We get calls, you know, hey, this won't pressurize, it won't spray. And a lot of times, if you pay close attention and everything's quiet, you can hear the black tank flush run pretty easily. It's spraying pretty hard in that tank, and you get that sound. Sometimes they don't work. You can't put water into it. It seems to not spray. You're not getting any water coming out of the low point. And on occasion, the line backflow can be kinked. That runs through a series of cross members, goes back to a couple tanks. So we've seen them kink. We've seen things touch on top of them. Shame on us. We will correct it if that happens. But so that's a common problem. I would say common, but it does happen. And then we also have this bad boy here. We'll let Jim dive into this and why this can prevent your black tank flush from working.
So just very, very basically, this is a check valve. It is a one-way valve. It's got an arrow on it. Water comes in, water goes out. This makes it so that you cannot have any sort of chance of backflow going back out of this and through the water system. It is a one-way only. No effluent can come back up through. But if this was installed improperly, if this was installed backwards, then when you pressurize this, it's going to be pushing against the arrow. It's not going to let any flow through. It's just not going to happen. You're not going to flush your tanks. But it's a very, very simple fix. You just simply would be unscrew it. Again, simple. There's no tools involved with this. They're just knurled nuts.
Switch that line.
Switch it, and switch where they come in. It may require some replumbing of where this is located.
A snip, a cut.
Exactly, depending on the orientation. These are typically mounted in accessible areas, typically under vanities or behind access panels near washers and dryers. So because this is a serviceable part, something we want you to be able to get to.
So the Cliff's Notes version of this is there's really not much that can go wrong with the backflow system short of this check valve.
Line, check valve, come back. That's usually it.
It's a super simple system.
Or we didn't hook it up, which I haven't seen that, but I guess that could be the case as well.
That could happen in some of the other brands.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Not alliance. I will tell you that this part can fail too. I've seen that. So sometimes I've seen people call me, hey, there's water coming out. It'll come out. You got to get this thing swapped out. Sometimes that check valve in there goes bad. Right. They make hundreds and hundreds of thousands of these things. So on occasion they do go. It's a very low failure rate, but it does happen. And when it does, it can be problematic.
This creates a leak inside your coach, or could create a leak inside your coach. Again, 2 minutes and you've got it.
And it's usually pretty easily accessible
Yes.
somewhere in the coach.
Yeah, that's intentional. We have to. You'll find it under the washer dryer box, water dryer or water prep. A lot of times, most cases, the bath vanity, you're going to find this tucked up kind of in the middle of nowhere. You'll see it kind of hanging up at an angle there. And it's intentionally put so that you can get to it, because that's just a common place to check if you have a problem.
So we talked about how this hooks up. Let's dig into the plumbing, the PEX lines. It's obviously not like the copper lines where you have to sweat them together and such. It's a pretty simple stuff. So talking about what tools do you need and how do they go together?
So from a tool standpoint, you're very, very basic. You've got your basic PEX line. We've got our hot water line. We've got our cold water line, and it's just simply a color to identify that.
And these can all be bought at any Lowe's or Home Depot.
Absolutely. I actually have a PEX kit that I carry with me in my camper. I bought it on Amazon. I think it was $25-30, and it's a really good thing to have on hand, because it could save a weekend from being ruined over a simple leak that you can pop a crimp ring off, pop a new one on, and be done with it. Because they can't work loose. I mean, it's not perfect. It's man-made. We make errors on occasion, and sometimes those things that get seated properly, or you got a diameter issue with the pipe, any number of things.
So these are 1/2-inch pipes?
Yeah, 1/2-inch PEX.
And are those called Oetiker clamps?
These are Oetiker Crimp Rings. That is the brand that sells them. I don't know if they're the only one, but they are the game in town for certain.
If you say Oetiker rings, people are going to know what
They're
you're
gonna know
talking
what you're
about when you
talking
go to the supply store.
The tools they sell, we got power Oetiker crimpers, you got handheld Oetiker crimpers, and then you got your Oetiker rings. And the cool thing is, again, is the simplicity of the system. You got PEX line, but you can carry lengths of this in your coach. Super lightweight, not hard to carry either. You got your rings, you got your crimpers, and you've got your cutters for your line. So a simple splice cut, you can reroute something in minutes. For example, we were talking about that black tank anti-siphon valve here. If you had that hooked up backwards, you might have to cut a snip, put an elbow in, run the line up. I mean, you can be done in minutes if you need to. So very, very important things to have with you as a camper. I would recommend it. I've used mine several times. I don't own an Alliance, but I've definitely had to work on my water lines on several occasions, and this is what I used to do it.
And that's it. Can you show them some of the fittings? The fittings, they come in straight fittings, bent fittings, screw-on fittings, shut-off valves.
Touch real quick. So when you look at our fittings, and Jim has one as well, if you notice, there's a couple barbs that stick out here, and that is designed when you put your line on your Oetiker ring. We're going to slide one on here. It comes up and touches that. And when you crimp right there, that is the optimal crimp spot for the best possible seal on that line. That's the goal there. And the crimp ring, I'm going to show you, kind of has a little nodule on the end of it. And those crimpers we have, they just have a jaw that comes down and butts that down tight.
Let's put this together for them. Let's show them.
Okay. I'll hold it for Jim here.
Open it up,
These are old tools, so don't judge us.
jam it on. Connection made.
That is a full-blown, really nice plumbing connection.
No Teflon tape, no sealant,
Nothing.
no anything needed.
And then, of course, your basic rocker valve here, which Jim can dig into that a little bit for you.
So all of our plumbing locations have shut-off valves on them. Underneath each sink, hot and cold. Behind each toilet, we have a cold shut-off valve. We want these there so that if you do have a problem, you can isolate that and continue operating the rest of your coach. We also use these in strategic locations, like going towards the washer and dryer up in the closet area or in the back, so that if you don't ever intend to use that area, you're not having water pressure in that with the potential of leaks. It allows you to isolate that. And also, if you've winterized it, it can stay winterized while you use the rest of your coach if you're not utilizing that feature. These are also very readily available. There's nothing specific about this to us. You can go to Home Depot or Lowe's. It does not have to look exactly like this, but all it is a 1/2-inch PEX fitting on each side, quarter turn shut-off valve.
They make them in plastic and in metal, right?
That's right. They
absolutely.
have brass and plastic. A lot of the fittings that you may or may not be familiar with is these. These are swivel fittings. We use 90s and straights. And people ask me, are they pipe thread a lot? And that's a common question I get asked. And I don't believe that they are actually, but they do rely on this tapered, like conical seat or seal inside there. That is actually what does the sealing. That's why we don't need to get 2 wrenches on these things and cram these things together super tight, because we're actually relying on a rubber or synthetic material in there to seal. These are available at Home Depot and Lowe's too. They are a little more challenging to come by, but what I have found is you can go at Amazon and buy like a pack of 5 or 10 of these things, throw them in your camper, and you're going to be set. They're not very expensive, but they are worth having.
And no tools needed to
No tools.
tighten.
That's all handheld.
Absolutely. Chris has got a valve again.
Well, and just kind of touch on these a little bit further. He explained it perfectly, but we use these in a lot of places in the coast. We're going to touch on a couple places we do use them. So for perfect examples, under the galley here, every freshwater connection we give you has a cutoff point. We just want to make it serviceable. So if you do spring a leak here, God forbid, you can kill water to it so you don't end your weekend. And we do that at every point in the coach, whether that be your galley, your washer dryer, any connection point in the coach. So they're very valuable little things for us that cost pennies. The other thing we use them on.
And if you don't own an Alliance, this is the reason that we did this. Is we saw a lot of RVers of other brands.
Oh yeah,
doing this themselves, owners and doing it themselves.
Yeah, a lot of times this really where it came from you guys, the feedback you gave us. Why don't we do it? Because people usually get them, they cut them open, they put these in for themselves for the exact reason we do them, because you guys gave us the idea. So just a great little thing. The other place we use them, it's going to be hard to see these, but behind this line here, usually where you find these, we got some blue and red pipe here with the rocker valves, just like we were just looking at. They come out of the underbelly. And what that is the low point drains for your freshwater system. You throw these open, it will dump your entire freshwater system. Generally, you're going to find them on the off door side of the coach near the water heater, usually under the water heater or a foot or two north or south of the water heater. And they're very important little things for you when you're winterizing for the season. I, for example, dump mine and I usually blow mine out. I don't always run antifreeze through my system. I know Jim's more full-blown antifreeze. I blow mine out with air. I put a little antifreeze in the P-traps and I'm off and running. So keep an eye out for those. We get a lot of questions on what those pipes are. There's also a pipe a little further across, Bill, if you can get it.
Right here, bud.
He's going to make me get on the ground here, isn't he?
That's all right. Mess those pants up and those fancy shoes, buddy. So that blue pipe there, that is your overflow tube for your freshwater tank. It serves as a vent pipe as well for your freshwater tank so it can breathe.
So unlike the black tank, this you can't overfill without having it come out.
Absolutely not. You start filling that bad boy 98 gallons. When you're done, it's going to start coming out that PEX line there. And then to the left of that, you see the white 1.5-inch drain with an 1.5-inch gate valve. That is your dump valve for your freshwater tank. You'll see a lot of people use a little 1/2-inch PEX line, and that'll take 3-4 hours to drain sometimes. This thing is a violent escape of water, and stand back if it's dirty or dusty, because it's gonna get you dirty. So that's what those, we get a lot of questions about what those things are. It's super simple. You got your low point drains with rocker valves, and you got your overflow line for your fresh tank, and then your gate valve for your dump.
So one other thing that I hear quite a bit, I'm sure you do as well, is what's that stink? You'll open up a cabinet door in the lab bath or the kitchen sink, and you'll smell kind of not an eggy sewerish type smell.
Gray water, black water, it could be any number of things.
We hear people say, I turn on my fan and I kind of smell some sewer gases. Can you guys shed some light on what that could be and how our drain system works?
So before we talk about these couple components, there's a couple things that you could be smelling. Number one, you got to pay attention to where you're at the campground and where the wind is. I have a Max Air fan just above my bathroom, and I have a black pipe vent that sticks right there. The right wind, it picks up the scent. It'll come right inside my coach. What's going on? You figure that out, and you adjust accordingly. So that's a fairly common thing. And I will tell you this: when you dump your tanks, I don't care what RV you're in, you're going to smell something initially. It's going to happen. It's a big, nasty, stinky thing. And I think even sometimes gray water smells worse than black water, but it happens. So be prepared for that little bit of a smell. And then if everything's plumbed properly, in general, you should not maintain a black tank smell or a gray tank smell in your coach. It's kind of like a sour. Really, it's not a pleasant smell at all. So if anybody's experienced it, you'll know what I'm talking about. But Jim will talk about a couple of the components that go into our coach that help prevent.
So let's talk about the drains first. You got two types of P traps and waterless traps.
So you got your traditional P trap, general household P trap, and all it does is trap water in there. It's a vapor barrier so that gas does not come back out and come up through the sink. You see it in a regular house. Any plumbing uses it. That is very common.
So if you're smelling some odors from the sink area, it is possible, if you haven't used your RV for a while, if the water's evaporated out of that U-shaped P-trap, it could let the gases through.
Without question. I've had, we'll just use in our shop, for example, we have a drain in there and it's got a same setup. If that thing sits around not used for a long time, you'll get a very nasty smell. we fill it with water again, and then it creates that vapor barrier again because that water will evaporate in there. So if you haven't used it for a long time, you walk in, you smell, that could very well be it. Put some water back in your traps, and it's very likely going to seal that off. And that's what it does, is just close that off for you. This is what we call a waterless trap. They've been around for a very, very, well, I'd say 15 years at least that I know of. This is a newer one developed by a local company here and made in Plymouth, Indiana, actually. So it's called a waterless trap because water does not have to be in it to seal off, but it's a very directional, I believe it has a flow line here. So water has to flow through. And what you see here is you've got a bladder inside here that's directional. It allows water through it, but not back through the other direction.
Oh, so that's a one-way bladder.
This is a one-way bladder. So a lot of times we try not to use a ton of these. We do use them on occasion, but when you got a low footprint, like a shower, or you're coming through somewhere where you want to minimize overall height, to gain other other ideas and your space, you put one of these in so you don't have, a 10, 12-inch P-trap take up a lot of space.
Typically you're going to see this used in a shower drain and in a lav bath area that's tight on space.
Just a tight spot.
Kitchen islands typically are going to have a traditional P-trap.
Correct. And the unique thing is these can be oriented north and south or east and west either way. So they're very, very, very universal in terms of making sure we can maximize overall space in the coach.
And they screw in on both ends.
Yep.
So if you ever needed to check it, if over time you're going to get hair and debris that comes down the drain, can clog it. If that little bladder gets open, what's that going to do?
That allows smell in simply as same as a P-trap. If there's no water in it, you got an open bladder, you're going to get black tank smell or gray tank smell coming straight up through here. So very, very important to know that. The other place we use this very commonly is a washer and dryer prep box. And what you find a lot of times, I've been called, I couldn't even tell you how many times, hey, we have nothing but a black tank smell or a gray tank smell in our coach. What is it? And I always ask them, do you have a washer and dryer? If you notice that big hook drain you put from a washer, they cram it down in here and they'll get this thing so far down in here that it gets a hold of this bladder and opens it up. So then that smell's just seeping out. So a lot of times you pull the drain out, you cut it a little bit, make sure it's in there properly and not too deep or too far, and then eliminate your problem. And I'd say damn near 10 out of 10 cases.
I want to touch on this just a little bit. One more thing about this particular type of trap is we definitely do not recommend that you use a snake to clean out this trap. If you've got a plug in there, if you've got one of these trap things or a harsh chemical situation, if you get a snake down in there, you're reaming around in there, you could have a good chance of damaging that bladder. Also, when you pull that snake out, it can actually invert the trap inside so that it's actually no longer sealing or no longer able to seal. It doesn't mean that it's completely destroyed necessarily. If you can get to it, you might be able to put it back, but it could be damaged from that situation. One thing that we didn't touch on,
but real quick, the good thing, if you do, super easy to replace, get a hold of us, we'll send you one.
Piece of cake. One thing that a lot of novice campers make the mistake of is when they're hooked up to a full sewer situation, we were talking about smells, is they said, I'm hooked up to full sewer, I can leave my tank valves open. There's a number of reasons why you shouldn't do that.
I never do.
But one of the main things is that you will get odors in your coach, not just from yourself, but from everybody else who's sharing that same septic system. Again, there's a lot of reasons why not to. Maybe we can go into that another point in time.
I believe you're referring to what's commonly called the poop pyramid. Is that
the poop pyramid in your black tank is real. It is not just an urban myth, and it is something that you don't want to have happen to you because it is at times quite challenging to get out of there. And that's simply in a situation where you've got solid buildup because there's no water in the tank for solids to disperse as they're added. So you get the solid mass in the middle of the tank.
So what you're saying is flush with plenty of water,
Absolutely.
Keep plenty of water in your black tank. Don't be a water miser when it comes to black tank.
No.
Let them fill. Save up a little bit of water. So when you evacuate and you're going to leave, you get a good clean flush.
Right.
Don't let things open the whole time. And again, you will smell it if you do. I promise you.
I just wanted to touch on that before we moved on. This is also something that we use. It's called an air admittance valve. Sometimes people call it a Studer valve. That turbo vent. Those are both brand names, but it's an air admittance valve. Again, very similar to the black tank flush situation. It is a one-way check valve, and we've got one right up in here. Notice how it's above the P-trap. And what all this does is, since we cannot vent this to the roof because of this particular location, it allows, as water flows down through this P-trap and goes down here, if we didn't have a way to allow air to come in, then we would end up with a very slow drain. It may burble and it may bubble and be just in general misbehaving. This allows air to come in and not create a vacuum. But then as soon as flow stops, this check valve is going to spring load up and lock up. So you should be getting no smell from there. But they can occasionally have situations where they don't seal correctly. If you accidentally filled up your gray tank too much and you got water coming up into the sink itself, it is now above the point of this. If you get some gray water up in here, sometimes gray water has debris in it, food debris. You can get a piece of debris in there that keeps it from sealing. Again, another source of smell. That's kind of bringing it full circle. Very easy to replace. Just screws off like this. You can go down to Home Depot, Lowe's. It does not have to look exactly like this. But again, air admittance valves, thread on. You're done. Start all over again.
Okay, so to break this down to its simplest terms, if you're smelling a sewage type odor inside your coach or inside a cabinet, there's only about 2 or 3 things to check. You can check the bladder of an inline waterless trap. Just make sure that's not been inverted and or replaced. You can check the air admittance valve under the kitchen sink, primarily is where that's used. Make sure your P trap has water in it. Otherwise,
Don't leave your valves open.
don't leave your valves open.
Let them fill. Get some water in there so they can keep that thing, hydrated, basically, so it keeps it liquid so it can drain when you need to drain it.
Water in your tanks is not a bad thing. People are like, oh, I got a half tank, I better drain it.
One other
Not
thing
necessary.
as well is your toilet, when you flush it, there's a setting on, especially this 310 series, because I have one in mine. You push that pedal down just a tiny bit, fill that toilet back up with water, because again, that serves just like a P-trap does. It's a vapor barrier, so that smell doesn't come in, and those tanks smell. It's a direct shot straight down there. So keeping water in your toilet when you're camping as well is key.
Because I think that answers a lot of the common questions I think we hear on plumbing. It certainly sheds some light on how easy PEX is to work with. You really can't mess it up with a couple of tools and a couple of fittings that are just push-on fittings and a clamp.
Right.
And anything that you did happen to make a mistake on is easily undoable. You cut the clamp off, you pull it apart. It's not soldered together. It's not glued together. It is redoable. If you're like, oops, I cut it too short, or oops, I got the wrong fitting, you can back off and not have a problem.
And remember, we got your back. You got a question, call us. We want to help. That's what we're here for.
We do this a lot of times a day with different situations.
And I think another time we'll be able to we'd like to take another deeper dive at plumbing. This is pretty surface level, some basic things, and there's a lot more to explore, and we'd love to see you guys back another time for that.